Okay, the recording is going. Okay. Welcome, everybody. This evening, we'll explore a journalism career that is remarkable for many reasons, including its longevity and variety. It began in a small country town in North Mississippi and has led our guests today on a journey to newspapers in large urban cities around the country. But for Otis Sanford, Memphis has always been home. He began working at the Commercial Appeal during a time when there were two newspapers in the city. He rose to become the first Black managing editor and led the editorial pages before assuming the Hardin Chair of Excellence at the University of Memphis. Today, he still writes columns for the Daily Memphian and does political commentary for ABC 24 and the radio station WKNO. He's the author of the book From Boss Crump to King Willie, How Race Changed Memphis Politics. And last month, he published his autobiography titled NEWSMAN, The Road from Route 2, Box 9, which we'll talk about today. Welcome, Otis, to this space. Congratulations on publishing the book and for so much longevity in journalism.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody else on the call today.
Okay. I mean, so you've written news stories, editorials, columns, books. I'm curious, how did you prepare and transition to each of these? Was it just something where you threw yourself at it, or did you do some training? How did you go about that?
A little bit of all that you just mentioned, Mike. I got interested in newspapers when I was a young boy. I grew up on a farm. Hence the subtitle for my book. We lived on a farm, and the mailing address was Route 2, Box 9, just west of a tiny town called Como, Mississippi. And I got interested in newspapers because my father, who only had a 6th grade education, loved newspapers. And we had the newspaper delivered to our mailbox every day, 6 days a week, except Sunday. And he gave me the assignment to read the newspaper and tell him what was in it. He was too busy to read it himself. And I took that assignment seriously. It was my first newspaper assignment, believe it or not. And I read the paper almost cover to cover. I told him everything that he wanted to know and a lot that he didn't want to know, because I was like 6, 7, 8 years old. And that led me to a lifetime love of newspapers. And when I figured out what the word journalism meant, because I didn't know, once I discovered journalism, I said that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist. And so the rest is, going to college, getting my first job, and all the training that you mentioned that goes into this. And it has led to a 51-year career in journalism.
When did you write your first news story, and what was it about?
Well, believe it or not, I wrote my first news story in the 7th grade. I wanted to play basketball, and I did eventually, but I wasn't good enough to make we had an elementary basketball team called the Pee Wee team, and I wasn't good enough to earn a spot on the team. But I went to a game one day and decided to write an article about the game and submit it to the high school newspaper. I went to a segregated high school. It was called North Panola Vocational High School in Como. But believe it or not, they had a school newspaper there that came out, sporadically. It wasn't regular. But I wrote an article about this game and submitted it to the high school newspaper, and I'm 7th grade. And they published it in its entirety. It didn't change a word, had my byline on it. And when I saw that, I was hooked. And I said, this is really exciting. This is what I want to do. So that was my very first article, an article about the Pee Wee basketball team when I was in 7th grade.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And from there, what was your education like in journalism, going through from middle school to high school and then to college? What did that look
Right.
like? Those steps.
Well, and it was very methodical steps, Mike. Again, I went to a segregated high school until my senior year. My senior year, 1970, and so I was a graduate in 1971. That was the first year of full integration in Mississippi. They had fought it for 16 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, but the Supreme Court said in 69 and 70 that you could no longer stall. And so my senior year of high school was the first year. We had a high school paper, as I said, at the segregated school. I worked on it my junior year. I was editor of it. And then when we integrated, they had co-editors, one black, one white, because they had to have co-everything, because black students outnumbered the white students. The white students left to go to private schools, but they still wanted white students to have a shot at every office at the school. So we had two student council members, we had two homecoming queens, we had two of this and two of that, and we had two editors of the newspaper, one black, one white. I was the black editor. But I tolerated that. Then I went to a community college for my first 2 years, close to home, to save my parents some money. They had already put 6 kids through college, and I was trying to save them some money. So I went to Northwest. It was then Northwest Junior College in Senatobia. They had a great newspaper there, and I worked on that paper my freshman year. I had a senior level position my second year and earned a journalism scholarship to go to Ole Miss. And I went to Ole Miss, worked on the student paper there, the Daily Mississippian, and that gave me my first opportunity to get my first job, which was at the Clarion Ledger in Jackson. And from there, I went from the Clarion Ledger to the Commercial Appeal, and from the Commercial Appeal to the Pittsburgh Press, from the Pittsburgh Press to the Detroit Free Press, and then back to Memphis as deputy managing editor, then editorial page editor, and then went to academia.
Yes,
that was my journey.
I see. Yeah, I've been reading. I've been reading the book, so I'm really familiar with the steps.
Okay.
So who were the three amigos? Tell us a little bit about the three amigos and how did they get their name?
Yeah, the three amigos, and every time I think about them, it warms my heart. Jerome Wright was the senior amigo. He was the first, he was not the very first black reporter at the Commercial Appeal. He might have been the second or third, but it was Jerome Wright. Me, I came in 1977. And then later in 1977, a guy named Leroy Williams, who changed his name to Karanja Ajaniku. And we were, at one point in 1977, we were the only 3 black reporters at the paper. But we developed instant friendship. We already knew Jerome because I had worked there as a copy clerk. So I knew Jerome from my college days. But when Karanja joined the staff, we just became best friends. And then all 3 of us got promoted to downtown beats. I was promoted first to cover federal court. Jerome was promoted to cover and we were the first 3 African Americans ever to cover those 3 beats. And we developed a strong bond. We worked hard. We wanted to own every story on our beat, beat the competition. But we had such a great friendship. We went to parties together and sporting events together. And we named ourselves the Three Amigos because we were the best of friends working at the Commercial Appeal at a time when there were very few African Americans in the room.
For the folks who may not be as familiar with journalism and the hierarchy, tell us about the significance of moving from like to downtown, like when you finally make it downtown. This is sort of like an old school thing that you don't see much anymore because there aren't really many bureaus or anything in the regional papers. So I'm guessing you started somewhere else and then
Yeah,
made your way downtown.
no question. Most people, most young reporters, most reporters in general, when they come on the staff, they come on as general assignment reporters, which meant you get to do any and everything that an editor assigns you to do. When I first got there, I was 23 years old, and I wrote obituaries a lot because that's what young reporters do. Back then, every person in town if you died, you got a free obituary. And it was a formulaic obituary, but that job taught you how to stress accuracy, because you don't want to make a mistake in an obituary. You don't want to misspell anybody's name. You don't want to give anybody more children than they have. You don't want to get the funeral wrong. You don't want to get the burial wrong. And so it's a training ground for teaching you accuracy. In addition to obits, obviously I had to go and just cover spot news, maybe a crime story at night, a speech at night. It's the name implies general assignment. Any assignment that comes up, you get it. The value and the importance of going downtown to cover a beat, that is a big time promotion. And because you get to have a beat that you develop and start developing your own stories, developing sources on your beat, making sure that you don't get beat by the competition. You mentioned the fact that we had 2 newspapers back then, and I certainly didn't want to get beat by the afternoon newspaper, the Press Scimitar. And so I worked hard on those beats, as did everybody. You know, you wanted to be downtown. You wanted to cover City Hall, federal court. It was amazing the stories that came into federal court. I covered a lot of public corruption back then, and I was writing stories about the governor and his family involved in corruption and bid rigging and granting pardons for pay. I mean, it was just unbelievable the kind of stories that were going on. Same thing at City Hall, same thing at the police beat. You wanted to be on those beats because you had the prestige. You developed a level of sources that I still have to this day. And that's been 50 years almost. And there are still some people around who were my sources back then. And so that's the value of wanting to have a downtown beat. It's one of the most prestigious things you could have at a newspaper.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I noticed also that the Memphis Association of Black Journalists got a little bit of a mention in the book. What was the significance of the organization back then? Since I know NABJ was started in the late 70s, I'm guessing the Memphis chapter would have probably started right around the same time, maybe?
That's correct. It had already started when I got here. I was in Jackson in 75 and 76. And I think it was in 75 when NABJ started. And there was an organization in Jackson. It wasn't called the Jackson Association of Black Journalists. It was just called an organization called Project Media, which was made up of African Americans in broadcast and print. It was only 2 of us in print in Jackson at that time. When I got to Memphis, around 70, I got there in 77, and I heard about the organization around that time. The people who are credited in my mind with starting the Memphis chapter were Myron Lowry, who was later a city council member. He actually served as mayor for a short period of time, an interim mayor. And he also served as the city court clerk But back in the 70s, he was a TV reporter and anchor at WMC Channel 5. And he was one of the leaders of the Memphis Association of Black Journalists. Lynn Normant was part of that before she left to go to Chicago and work for Ebony Magazine, became managing editor. Jerome was part of it, and I got involved in it primarily through Jerome. And as the other Black reporters joined the newspaper, they joined the organization, as did Black broadcast journalists at all the TV stations and radio stations. So it became a thriving organization in the 80s. We even hosted a regional conference in 1982, as I recall. That was really a big deal. I mean, we had a lot of heavyweight speakers. The newspapers supported it, helped sponsor it. The editor appeared on panels. I mean, it was a big deal. So the organization has that storied history, but you have to start with Myron Lowry and Lynn Normant and a few others in broadcast.
Just want to pivot back to the Three Amigos. I noticed that in the chapter that's named after the Three Amigos, it also talks about your father, and again also details the death of your father. I was wondering if there was some substitution there in terms of like relation. Did they sort of fulfill a void that was created with the death of your father at that time?
Absolutely, Mike, and thank you for picking that up. At one point, I thought about writing separate chapters on Dad and a separate on the Amigos. But I was writing a lot and I had to cut some. My publisher says, no, if you want to sell a book for $85, $90, you keep what you got, but you're going to have to cut this down. And here's my thinking around that. The chapter is called Dad and the Three Amigos. I was very close to my father. I was really even closer to my mother. She lived to be 101. But my dad developed cancer at the end of the year when I first came back to Memphis. And it was devastating for the whole family, but it was devastating for me because it was at that time that I really had developed a strong relationship with my father. And again, he was the one that got me in journalism in the first place by telling me to read the paper. And so I was really in a bad situation when he got lung cancer, and it kept progressing downward. And it was Jerome and Karanja who sort of picked me up, so to speak, and were, I think I even used the term in the book, they were my emotional salve that got me through a really tough period in my life when I finally realized I was probably going to lose my dad. And they were there for me in every way possible. They cheered me up every time I was down. They took me out for a beer when I needed it. They said, let's go to a Tigers basketball game, or let's do this, let's do that. They were the two people in my life, other than my family, who got me through a very tough time losing my dad. And that's why I connected that into one chapter, because if it had not been for my amigos, I would have really been at, sort of on edge. I think my reporting would have suffered some because I was thinking about my dad all the time, and they got me through that really tough period.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm also interested in, how did you make the transition to editing? From reading the book, I could definitely tell like a lot of stories, a lot of recounting of news events and stories that you've covered. I'm interested in why not remain a reporter, and also how did you make the transition to becoming an editor?
Well, actually, and I thought about remaining a reporter. Here's the pivotal moment, and I recount this in And then we remember what chapter now. But when the press center closed, it was in, they closed on Halloween 1983. And then there was one newspaper left. And we hired a lot of people from the press center, a lot of good people. But the very next day after the press center closed, and keep in mind that the press center was really the favorite newspaper for African Americans in Memphis. A lot of African Americans didn't like the commercial appeal because of its history, because of the way it covered, especially on the editorial pages, how it covered the sanitation strike. They were really brutal against the sanitation workers, calling them anarchists and vilifying Dr. King for coming here and stirring up trouble. They were very supportive of the mayor at that time, Henry Loeb. And so there was a lot of distrust between the Black community and the African-American community. But the day after the press center closed, the commercial appeal ran a front page photograph. This is in October now, so it's cotton picking time in the South. And they had a front page picture of a Black man down from Cleveland, Mississippi, or from that area, picking cotton. And it was the front page of art. It was the front page. The front page with it. There was no news value in it at all. And all of us, we had a lot of Black reporters by that time. And we were furious. And how could you do this? There's no news value here. And you're stereotyping Black people as only being able to pick cotton. And what I thought about at that time, Mike, was that the reason that story got into the paper was because there was no African-American voice in that news meeting that day to say, this is probably not a good idea, especially the day that the press center publishes its last edition. The very next day, you're going to have a Black man on the cover picking cotton. And that's when I said, there needs to be some more diversity in that room. And so that's when I started thinking about being an editor. I still had a love for reporting and writing, so I didn't act on it right away. But that got me to thinking about it. And eventually, when I saw that there was no diversity in the editing ranks at the paper, everybody who from assistant city editor, line editor, all the way up to the top editor, every one of them was white. I started to look for opportunities to do that. I was rejected one or two times, but I finally, in 1986, I got an editing job to be like an assistant metro editor, covering politics, or in charge of editing politics and minority affairs, and that gave me my first taste of editing, and then I went on from there, from 1986 on.
I see. Yeah, I have a follow-up question, but it's we're going to pivot back to about the racial tension between the CA and the community, because I think that's an interesting thread. But I'll wait a little while before we revisit that.
Okay.
You're not yet in charge, so about the decision to choose Chris Peck for the executive editor job, we're going to jump a couple paces. You said
we're jumping a lot of paces.
We're jumping a lot of paces. We're jumping cities and time, because I want to make sure that we get to it. You said in the book, I shared Susan's belief that race played a role in the decision, but it was more benign than overt. And I'm curious, what did you mean by that? And if there were other instances throughout your time where you felt the same way, where, well, one, I mean, what do you mean by you felt like their choice? Just for context, and maybe give us some context around the choice, because I know, but some people on the call may not know.
And they may not. Some people do. I'm looking at names here and I see people who know. But thank you for bringing up that statement that I made, because I felt it was benign instead of overt. And here's why I say that. I was being groomed, Mike, to be editor of the paper. My mentor, the guy who gave me 4 jobs in this business, a guy named Angus McCarran, he hired me as a copy boy, copy clerk. He hired me as that general assignment reporter in '77. He hired me as an assistant city editor in Pittsburgh. I picked up and left Memphis, didn't know a soul in Pittsburgh except him. But I went because he told me he was going to teach me how to be an editor. And I took him at his word. So I left my family and went up there by myself to learn how to be a better editor. And then after all of that, we may or may not get to it, I come back to Memphis after being at the Free Press, Detroit. Angus was back in Memphis by that time, and he brought me back as deputy managing editor with the understanding that he was grooming me to take his place as editor. And I was the leading candidate. I think the chapter that you're talking about, I started by saying that I went to an NABJ convention. It was in Orlando in 2001, and one of the senior executives at Scripps, E.W. Scripps Company, which owned the Commercial Appeal, took me aside at the NABJ convention and said, "I want to talk to you about your future." And we had a long conversation about me becoming the editor. And he gave me every indication that I was not just a candidate, but the leading candidate. And so I started preparing myself to do this job. And a lot of people in the newsroom thought that I was sort of the heir apparent. Now, we had a managing editor, Henry Stokes, who was a wonderful guy. But I don't know that Henry had the aspirations to be the editor. And so I was thinking that I was on a track to be the editor. But then I say it was kind of out of the blue. Chris Peck, who had been the editor in Spokane, Washington, and had left to be to have an academic chair at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. He heard about the opening in Memphis. He had only been in Dallas for less than 6 months. And then he reached out to a friend that he knew who was actually running the search for the editor here in Memphis. And so I instantly got competition from Chris Peck to be editor of the paper. And in the end, they chose Chris over me. And the reason I said that I said it was more benign than overt is because the relationship that Chris had with the person leading the search or helping to make the decisions at Scripps, they had been friends and fellow editors at newspapers in Washington. Chris was at Spokane. Mike Phillips, who was in charge of the search, had been the editor in Bremerton, Washington, just outside of Seattle. And so they had a relationship. And that is why I say it was a connection that put Chris over me more than it was race, but it was also race too. Because while nobody at Scripps said it out loud, they just didn't feel as if I was fully prepared to be editor. A lot of it had to do with the fact that Angus had been a thorn in their side for so many years. Angus got to do what he wanted to do. And sometimes he told the Scripps corporate people to get lost. I know how to run a newspaper. You don't need to tell me. And they couldn't touch him because he was a 3-time Pulitzer winner. And the leadership at Scripps, liked him. And it was only after the leadership, the top person retired, that Angus started to fall out of favor. And so that's the whole context here, Mike, is that, yes, there was some race involved, but I felt that it was more the buddy system, looking out for one another, and giving a fellow editor from newspapers in Washington another opportunity to be editor at a much larger newspaper in Spokane, that put Chris over me for the job, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm. So after, I mean, when you read the book, you can't help, because there's so much foreshadowing around, I was being prepared for this, that's
Yes.
a terrible feeling. It's like to watch some other guy come in the door and take what was being prepared for you. I'm interested in, how did you get over it? What did you rely on to cope in that period of disappointment? I mean, I have to imagine that it's somewhat embarrassing, even because these are, you're around colleagues who you've known for years, and now you have to like eat crow and kiss the ring. Even how did you get through that period first?
Wow. Man, you're asking some really great questions here.
I mean, because I've lived in newsrooms. I know what it is like. I mean, it's like it's not a family, but it's almost like a second family, because you spend so much time in the place. So,
well, actually, for me in the commercial field, it was a family. It was my second family, and I had the Amigos. I had Peggy McKenzie. I had Wendy Thomas. I had a lot of people, and Wendy came later on. But let me answer your question this way. I was hurt because of the way I found out, and I detail all of this in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that Chris was tough competition, but I still held out hope that Scripps was willing to make a bold move here and appoint its first African-American newspaper editor, because they hadn't had any before then. And when I looked at Memphis, with a population even at that time, it was approaching 60% African-American, might have been over 60%. This was 2002. And when you look at Spokane, Washington, I think the Black population of Spokane was maybe 1 or 2%.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't want to believe that they would bring in an editor from a place like that to be editor of the single daily newspaper with that kind of racial diversity. But they did. And I was devastated. When I got word about it, I learned about it because one of the assistant managing editors at that time called me on a Sunday night and told me that she heard from a real estate agent that Chris Peck was in town that day looking at houses, and had told that real estate person, I'm going to be the next editor. And nobody had told me that. And so I was furious. And I immediately called the publisher and told him what I had learned. He was kind of ashamed to say it. He didn't really respond to it. But the next day, Monday morning, he came straight to my office and took me down to his office. And that's where I had a conversation with people at Scripps on the phone, with a conference call with Chris. And they were saying, yes, Chris, we're appointing Chris, but we want you to stay and be Chris's managing editor. We're going to give you a promotion. We're going to give you all this, that. We want you to stay. And Chris said, well, yes, I want you to be the managing editor, which would have been a promotion because I was deputy managing editor. And so I didn't answer it at that time. I didn't even ask any questions. I just got up and left and took the rest of the day off to try to gather my thoughts. Because Mike, I really was upset and hurt. But I thought about it for a day, talked it over with my wife, Elaine, and I decided to be magnanimous about it. Because if I had said no and left, people in the newsroom who supported me and supported me vigorously, it would have hurt the newsroom. It would have divided the newsroom. So I was thinking more about the newsroom than I was myself. So I decided to swallow my pride here and become a team player. And I welcomed Chris. We had a meeting in the conference room a day or so after that, where he was introduced to the staff. I introduced him and got him some gifts, some Memphis memorabilia. I think I went down and got some Memphis Redbird stuff to give to him. And I presented a united front in front of the staff. And I never will forget this, and it's in the book. After that meeting, Jeff Calkins, the sports columnist, sent me a message, inter-office message, and just simply said, "Thank you for staying." And I think that kind of validated me to say I made the right decision. I could have easily left, but I didn't have another job. I know I could have got another job. I mean, I love being in Detroit. I probably could have gone back to Detroit if I wanted to. But I decided that managing editor was still a prestigious job, and I wanted to make that job continue to be what other managing editors in that role had. And that was a lot of authority, a lot of influence in the community, and I was determined to keep it that way.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I've had some trouble imagining was how likelihood that reality would have been in that time, because it's maybe like 4 or 5 years removed from when like my journalism awakening happened. Like the first Black top editor I met was Greg Moore at the Denver Post. And I know about Dean Baquet in LA.
Yeah.
How common was it back then? Like, who else was like, was it really that, would it have been that much of a leap if they would have appointed you the top job?
Well, one of my top mentors in journalism was a guy named Bob Magruder in Detroit. Bob was just an absolute jewel of a guy. And he was the managing editor at the Free Press and was responsible for hiring me there as deputy city editor. I was the first person to ever come from the outside, I was told, to be deputy city editor at the Free Press, which was probably the toughest job in the newsroom because you're sort of the traffic cop for everything that goes on news-wise at the paper and in Detroit and in Michigan. And he hired me for that job. And I loved Bob Magruder. And he ascended to be the executive editor of the Free Press. So he was one of the people that I looked at. Jim Crutchfield had been a top editor in Akron. He had been in Detroit. So there were others around who I knew from NABJ. So in my mind, we're talking 2002 here. And at the end of 2002, it should not have been a major leap to name the first African-American editor of a major African-American city like Memphis. So that was one of the things that was playing into my mind. I mean, why is this so hard? I do have support from the newsroom. I've got support from the community. There were business leaders, and I recount this in the book. There were business leaders who chartered a plane to go to Cincinnati and talk with the leadership there about the next editor. Now, they didn't go to lobby for me, but they wanted to make sure that whoever the next editor was would understand Memphis and would understand how critical the newspaper was to Memphis. And there was one person in that group who was lobbying for me. I know that for a fact. So it should not have been that hard. Unfortunately, they were not ready to do it.
I see. Today, the number of like Black top editors, I mean, granted, there's a lot of nuance around the newspaper business that we could, could get into, but we already know the state of the industry. But still, you know,
Yeah.
I do recall maybe like 3 years ago, there was a time when like you would look around and you could count on two hands the number of Black people like over major American newspapers. Like there was Kevin Merida in LA, there was Maria Reeve in Houston. Who else? We had this was probably after Dean Baquet stepped down from the New York Times. Of course, we have Mark Russell in town here in
Right.
Memphis.
Right. Who's
But
on
there were a
this
couple
call? I
others.
see.
There were quite a few others around, and I feel like they've all kind of fallen. Ronna Cash in what is that, North Carolina?
Mhm.
Oh, of course, we still have, I
Well,
can't remember his name, in Atlanta. But my point is that the numbers seem to have waned, and I'm wondering what are the barriers to achieving like that level of leadership and maybe more specifically sustaining it.
well, I mean, and you mentioned some good ones, and I'll mention some others. Maybe not at very large newspapers, but even my former paper, the Clarion Ledger. Ronnie Agnew became the editor there, African American guy who also went to Ole Miss. Benny Ivory was the managing editor at the Clarion Ledger. You had others in, and I give Gannett credit here because Gannett had a very good diverse group of editors at their newspapers, and they were succeeding and thriving in those jobs. I think what has happened here is the same thing that has happened with newspapers in general. It got very difficult to do your job. You had to worry more about the bottom line. You had to wind up cutting staff. You had to do more with less. Mark and I were talking about that earlier today. And it became a lot of stress and strain in order to do that job. And so I think a lot of people just got worn out doing that. The ones who were doing this kind of thing in the 90s and in 2000s. And I'm not saying this because he's on this call, but Mark Russell has thrived here in terms of being a top editor in Orlando and certainly here in Memphis, even though he has had to deal with doing a lot more with less. And so I just think that there are a lot of people who were elevated to those top editing jobs who just saw it was just very difficult to maintain the level that they wanted to keep the paper at with all of the economic challenges. And that's one of the reasons I finally, left for academia because it was getting tougher. And the first thing I had to do, Mike, as managing editor, when I got that promotion, I had to lay off about 6 or 7 people. The very first major job, major duty was doing that. And it was very hard to do. I had to lay off of one of my mentors, a young student who I brought up from college and hired him as a sports reporter. And I had to wind up letting him go. And so that was a lot of stress that I really didn't want to continue to do after all the years that I had put in to try to get where I wanted to go.
I see. This might be the final question. You're in the middle of what looks like, by my count, maybe a third or fourth act. I'm interested, what advice do you have for other journalists, especially Black journalists, who want to achieve the same level of longevity? What's your secret?
Well, and there are a lot of people on this call who have had a lot of longevity, not just me. I have been fortunate to do a lot of different things. You're right. I think it starts with just loving the job. I have loved writing. I have tried to perfect writing. You never get to perfection, but I have worked all my life to be a storyteller. That's what I wanted to do. Even in my editing role, I considered myself, and I say this in the book, I've always considered myself a writer on loan as an editor. And I always wanted to help the reporters that I was editing, whether it was a columnist like Wendy or a reporter. I had some great reporters in Detroit, and we did some great journalism there. I mean, covering some huge stories in Detroit. And I saw it as my role to help make their copy better every single day. And so it's all about the storytelling. It's all about the information that you're giving. And I've always loved to do that. So you got to love it first. And you got to now, these days, you got to be a multimedia person. As I said, I was a newspaper guy, but now I'm a television guy and have been since 2011. I didn't set out to do television, but I found after I started it that I could reach another level of another audience, because I've reached an audience on television that didn't even know I ever even worked at the paper, let alone be managing editor of the paper. And so that was an opportunity to reach a new audience. And then I go from there to doing radio. And all of the things that you can do with radio, which I've loved ever since I was a kid. So it's just a matter of perfecting your craft, becoming the best writer you can be, having great news judgment, and working every day to make journalism better. I'm an opinion journalist now, so I have a lot of freedom to say what I want to say, how I want to say it, and when I want to say it. And nobody tells me what to say. And so you have to love it. And if you love it the way I have loved it all these years, and remake myself as I've had to remake myself, including going to academia and teaching the next generation of journalists. I love that job at the university. I love teaching. I love helping young journalists, whether they're broadcast or print, to grow. And I had a lot of success stories with young people at the university who have gone on to do some amazing things. So it starts with the love, and it starts with continuing to grow and remake yourself, learn new skills, and understand where journalism is today, which is nowhere what it was in 1975 when I got my first job.
I see. So we're approaching the end of our time together. This has been really great. One day we have to meet and maybe meet in person and talk more about newspapers, because I have a lot of thoughts too.
Yeah.
But no, this has been great. For everybody who hasn't picked up the book yet, you can. I checked it out from the library, the autobiography,
Good.
which is different. I figured it's different from a memoir. A memoir would only focus on a certain portion of life, but this covers Otis's full life from birth all the way to today.
Yes.
It's a really fascinating book, especially if you're a student of the newspaper industry. Pick it up. It's in all the books. I saw it in Novel too, when we held an event last week. So it's there too.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think we good to wrap up.
Well, thank you for this
Any final words?
opportunity.
Wendy has a question.
I see Wendy is saying, do we have time for a question? I don't know why not, unless you don't want to entertain questions. And I want to thank Mark for adding some other context to the top editorship.
Yes. I see Patrice. Yeah, she was in Dallas for a while. And of course, Leroy, that's who I was thinking of. Monica, she's at USA Today
in Atlanta.
Miami.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's some great representation out there now. It really
yeah,
is.
yeah.
But I'm
For
still
some
to hear
reason, it
what
felt
Wendy.
like the numbers had fallen uh,
Yeah.
by my count.
Well, Russ would know that more than I would, since I'm not in the daily grind anymore.
Okay, well, I think we'll let Wendy. You can ask your question.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Otis, you remain an inspiration for me and so many others. And I could sit with you for hours and just ask questions about this book, and maybe we'll get another opportunity to talk to you again.
And
I
we
want to
will.
push back just a
We
little
will.
bit on, yes. I want to push back just a little bit on something you said about the choice of Chris Peck being benign, at its
Yeah.
core.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, the fact that Chris had this relationship with, I think you said it was Mike Phillips, was that his name?
Mike Phillips.
At a time when there were very few Black people leading newsrooms, to me, is in itself a reflection of a racist system, right? The fact that you didn't have that long-term connection with Mike, but Chris did, who came from a family, if I remember correctly, where his father maybe was a newspaper man. You didn't have that.
Right.
You didn't have that connection. I would wager that no Black people had that connection. So Chris getting that job, someone who's not from Memphis, and I think struggled in some part in that job because he had no ties to the South or Memphis. You clearly should have been the choice. And I would just argue that it was racist that you did not get that opportunity.
That's a good point, Wendy. And I
Nicer than
guess,
I.
yeah, I guess I wasn't. It would have been easy for me to go there. Again, in the book, Susan Thorpe was the one who came in and said it was racist to me, to my face. And of course, obviously, a part of me was convinced that it was racist. But I thought it was also the old boy system, which at its core is racist. I agree with that. But I wanted to give another avenue for the reason, and then let the readers of the book, based on everything else that came after that, decide whether it was based solely on race or not. Because after that, and I described this in vivid terms in that chapter, the relationship or lack thereof that I had with Chris during the time, and how I responded to it, and how I plotted my own move to get out from under him and take over a section of the newspaper that gave me the authority and the power, really, that helped me go another direction in journalism, which was opinion journalism. So that is why I said it that way. But I'm not going to dispute what you're saying here, Wendy. And I want the readers of the book to make their own decision about whether it was or was not solely about race.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer.
And thank you. And thank you for being the terrific columnist that you've always been.
Yeah, we appreciate that clarity, Wendy. It's much appreciated. I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, she's right. She's right. She's right. And let me go a little bit further, Mike, because the book also talks about the shortcomings that Chris had coming into the job that was pretty much ignored by the leadership at Scripps, whether they knew it or didn't know it. If they did know it, it was they didn't do a good job of vetting. And if they did know it, then they just ignored it and said, well, we still want him. He's our guy. And so let's give him the job anyway. But let's make sure we keep Otis, and let's make sure that Otis gets a promotion out of this, and try to make him as happy as we possibly can. And that is what's happened. That's what happened. And, you know, I feel good about telling that part of the story, which a lot of people didn't know.
Let's see, Monte has a question. Go ahead. You have your hand raised at least. Go ahead, Monte.
I do. Hey, Otis, how you doing?
Hey, Monte, how are you?
I'm good. Good to see you as usual. Um, so one of the things that I find inspiring about you, of course, is your opinion pieces, but also the fact that you are an educator in journalism and media. And what, my question to you is, how do you find it rewarding now in a time where it seems that interest may be waning in our, you know, in our discipline, or it's shifting away from what it used to be?
Yeah, that's a great question, Monte. I have figured out, as best I can, I have tried to figure out, well, where's the audience now? And let me figure out how to reach that audience wherever they are. You know, I'm not a pro at social media, but I navigate it, you know, on the platforms that I want to navigate on, and I use it to put my journalistic opinions out there on a regular basis. Again, being an opinion journalist gives me a lot of freedom, and I am not above calling out hypocrisy, racism, even political power plays just because you have the power to do it. I'm not above calling that out. And I've made a lot of, I don't want to say enemies, I've certainly made a lot of adversaries as a result of that. And a lot of them are at the highest levels of politics in this state and in this region. But that's my job now. And I have no hesitancy to do that. So yes, the industry is a tough thing right now. But I have found, you know, I do what I want to do now in this business, which, because I'm in my 70s now. And so I'm not trying to be an editor again. I'm not trying to even be a reporter again. I am trying to give opinions and express analyses that help communities understand the place that they're living in. And I do it where I want to do it. And I'm doing it at Channel 24. I'm doing it at WKNO, and I do it every now and then at the Daily Memphian. And that's enough for me right now. And the book gave me an opportunity to put everything about my life and my career in perspective. And so I may just stop all of it at some point. And if I have another book in me, which I don't know that I do, we'll see where that goes.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Monte. Good to see you, man.
Unless there's any other questions or unreadiness, I think we might be good to conclude our time together. Just giving it last. Okay, well, I want to thank you again, Otis. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all the some of the other help you've given me too, in trying to trace the history of MABJ.
Yeah.
That's well appreciated as well. But
and thank you for giving me this opportunity. There is nothing I like better than talking about journalism, or very little that I like better than talking about journalism. Where it has come from, where it is right now, where I would hope that it would be in the future. I try to do a little of that at the end of the book, and it's just, journalism has been, other than my family, one of the most important things in my life. The opportunity to tell stories and affect communities, help communities understand themselves, and again, call out the hypocrisy when it's necessary to call it out. And I'm going to continue to do that as long as I can.
All right. And we are so grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, take care, everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Take care.